Everyone, as you said, my name is Paul Spears. I'm the head of engineering for Valiantys North America. And today I want to talk to you about the unique perspective and background that our engineering team has had and how that's shaped the way that we view the Forge platform and the developer ecosystem within it. So to help provide the context of this talk, a lot of it is actually about my personal background and history before joining Valiantys and how that's kind of been a part of not just my journey, but many of my other engineering team members. We actually all started together as part of a software development firm called Oasis Digital. And within that firm, we had a particular niche within the boutique software development and consulting space. We delivered custom solutions for enterprises, anything from horse trading to silicon wafer manufacturing in the semiconductor industry. We were providing solutions across the entire range of verticals. We were primarily focused in web. We were very, very deep within the Angular development framework. So that's Angular's answer to the web development space that's Google's answer to the web development space. And we got in really early. We ended up having a background in teaching and education, and we utilized that to put together the first online and in-person live instructor-led training for Angular, and we gained a huge first mover advantage from being the first ones out there providing that training to the ecosystem. In fact, it was so successful that we ended up being able to partner alongside the Google team that was creating Angular, and we were able to be their first eyes out in the field, talking with customers, talking with the users of the framework, and providing them feedback on how it was being used, what worked, what didn't work, how the framework could be changed or modified to be more accessible to other individuals within the ecosystem, and help them understand the gap, the generational thinking gap between developers who were coming from older paradigms of development into the web ecosystem and platform. So that success that ended up growing in the opportunities that it presented us. Of course, that led into consulting and advising within many of the Fortune 500 companies. They would come to us and say, we've got development teams across 100 different verticals within our organization, and we'd like to standardize on Angular as our new dev platform. So we would come in, we would show them the ropes of how the Angular ecosystem works, how to put structures in place, how to put code generators, templating, how to put governance in place that would allow their development teams, anytime they wanted to build an Angular app, that they would be building it consistently with all the right paradigms and practices that span across their entire organization, rather than having 100 different unique takes on how to use the framework and platform. Now, it didn't just end with what we were doing with our services, it also extended out into community building as well. At one point, we had up to 3 different user groups serving community members in different niches, online and site, and at varying levels of expertise within the framework, and as well as tons of speaking content, free and available through YouTube and blog posts. And we really ended up building a large community of Angular developers as we went around, mostly around the US and occasionally into Europe, teaching and proselytizing the Angular framework. However, this isn't an Angular conference, and it's not even really a web development conference. It's an Atlassian developer conference. So how did we go from being this software development shop to part of Valiantys, this large partner in the services ecosystem? Well, the software development side ended up being so successful that we started having our clients come to us and say, you know what? The software you guys are writing for us, that's great. But what's really catching our eye, the secret sauce that we're really seeing within your team, is actually the tools and the process that you use to actually deliver that software, communicate those updates, and explain to us what's going on and how things are operating. And out of that success, we spun up a sister company called Expium. Expium was focused on providing Atlassian-specific solutions and services. For those that might be from the US, they're the ones that started Jira Bootcamp. You have probably been stalked by them online through their ads or possibly even attended one of their classes. And they were wildly successful in the same way that we were with our Angular Bootcamp trainings that we had kicked off. And eventually that service ended up outpacing the growth of our development team. And I found myself helping with the more technical challenges that XBeam encountered when serving their clients more and more frequently. Things started to shift in how my time was applied within the organization. It became less focused on how do I help my team members know how to move a button 3 pixels to the right, and it became more focused on I have this deep technical challenge within my organization. How can you help us solve the problem? And the work was more abstract as well. It was less to do about here's the feature punch list that we need to be working on and delivering, and more around value delivery. And it became my efforts became more and more valuable to our clients and as a result, the company as well. And I had this epiphany, I had this moment of realization of how the Atlassian ecosystem was taking the skills that our engineering team had developed and actually amplifying them. We were able to look at that platform and think about how we could utilize it to deliver solutions instead of writing code. So we were a web development shop, and now all of a sudden I'm realizing, you know what, if I were to code a little less and squint a little more, meaning if I were just look real close at the features of Atlassian and start to think about Atlassian as a development framework, is there a way that I can deliver more value in less time for my clients? And what I started to realize is, yes, absolutely. There are key characteristics to how Atlassian operates under the hood that we can leverage that have nothing to do with the way Atlassian actually operates in the products that they sell. And so, as I've been thinking about this idea, as I was putting this talk together, I actually worked through a couple different titles, and one of them could have been Atlassian as an infrastructure. The idea of, you know what, Atlassian's got a lot of great products. Let's put those aside and let's dream up something new. We want to use their infrastructure, but can we use their infrastructure in a way that is delivering unique experiences to our clients? Another one is Atlassian Beyond Work Management. Here, when I say Beyond Work Management, I don't mean the product called Work Management. I mean the idea that Atlassian is in the service category of providing work management solutions. And so again, it's this idea of taking what Atlassian does. That's great, it's a great market, but I'm a developer by heart and nature and trade, and I want to find a new way to twist the arm of Atlassian to do my bidding. So to do that, we're going to take a look at another layer deeper, and we're going to take a look at some of the traditional ways that folks think about the APIs and how they're utilized within Atlassian. And particularly, we're going to start with ticket creation. We're going to take a look at traditional ways and non-traditional ways. So the traditional ways, people usually think about using it to create tickets that are in support of what the business does, helping the business do the work of the business. Or they're used to integrate gaps between systems. Maybe there's something that can happen over an ITSM or something that can happen over in Confluence that requires some sort of custom solution of generating out a ticket on the fly. That's typically the kind of mindset that Atlassian developer has when thinking about these APIs. And the lastly, of course, is like a third-party ticket syncing between disparate systems within the organization. Now, when we think about it, we're thinking about it much more broadly and again, more abstractly. We're thinking of it as tickets could be anything. Tickets don't have to have anything to do with work. We're actually thinking about the ticket portion of the Atlassian ecosystem and the workflows. We think about them together as, oh, that's a state management solution and a software architecture diagram. It has all the tools and pieces that we need to think about a data process pipeline and the constraints and the workflows that it goes through in order to be transformed and usable by our end users. So let's look at ITSM next. So in that space, typically you see it used for your classic traditional IT devices, hardware management, the management of that hardware, reserving it, creating help requests. It's very focused on the outside user and their need to tap into a particular collection of assets that the company has, manages, or operates. It's a great use case, nothing wrong with that use case. But again, my developer hat that only recently started to focus on the Atlassian ecospace. When I look at it, I see a database. This is not necessarily a new or revolutionary concept. I know many of our clients have already come to the same conclusion of like, oh, I can put anything I want into an asset schema, and yes, you can. But more broadly, I can use that as the backend, the data storage for the software architecture that I'm building out. It was actually hinted at by the keynote yesterday that, hey, this could actually do away with the need for a backend someday. And yeah, we've done that. We've been there and did that. So you can store things in it like HR data. We actually, at one point, were storing our HR data in it. We didn't have an off-the-shelf HR system. We twisted Jira's arm until it became our HR system. Certificate and credential tracking. This is another similar use case where we were tracking and holding within assets all of the various data points that you needed in order to understand how to become Jira certified. It's like part of our onboarding process for our employees. We were using it towards that end. Of course, generic database of data. We've used it to house our contracts. We actually used it in place of Salesforce. And then, of course, just like this doesn't have to be IT assets. Like it has ITSM in the name. I see a database. So let's go one more layer deep and let's take a look at some case studies here. So we've been applying this mindset of, well, what if Atlassian were just a part of our software development architecture? And as clients have approached us asking for custom solutions, we've had several of them who didn't know or care what a Jira was. They're like, what's a Jira? How would I use a Jira? And that was fine. That wasn't what we were trying to sell them. But they're just wanting some custom software. They had a solution that they're needing built. And again, we understood the value that the Atlassian platform could provide. And so with this first case study, this was for an AI firm that sold hardware and software used to provide safety reporting within the infrastructure industry. So in particular, in the US, they focused on the power distribution sector. And so they had a trailer that you could drop on site at a construction site, and it would scan the area with a camera, 360 camera, and it would look for safety violations that were occurring while workers were present on site. And if a safety violation occurred, they would need to be able to take that information and report on it. So the overall flow of how the system worked, fairly straightforward. There's really only 4 aspects to what it needed to do. It needed to capture the safety events. It needed to take those safety events and then do additional analysis on them. So the camera that existed out on the field, low power, low compute capabilities, so it didn't have access to like very deep AI model capabilities. And so it was overly aggressive in suggesting that a safety issue occurred, and that would then need to send that information on for additional verification, where it would narrow down to a more precise estimate of whether or not a safety violation had in fact occurred. And if so, it would need to alert someone on site. And then from there, at the end of the month, they would need to be able to produce a review and some reports of what had happened on the site. So fairly straightforward. And so we looked at this problem, we said, great. Is there value, and can we use the Atlassian platform to solve this problem? And more importantly, can we do it in a way that provides more value than if we were to put it together from scratch? And we were able to look at this and say, okay, you know what? When I'm seeing this, what I'm seeing is I'm seeing a very standard Jira workflow. I'm seeing when a safety event occurs, we could use Atlassian to create a ticket, and then that Jira issue, once created, could be part of automation that would go on to trigger an API to go do advanced AI detection on the images that were captured. And then based upon the results of that, send it down the workflow through one branch or the other. Either it detects that a problem didn't occur and it closes out the ticket, or it sees that one does. And then at that point, it notifies the safety officer on site and puts the ticket into a status of just awaiting a response from that safety officer as to whether or not they look at it and they further confirm and acknowledge that that event was dealt with. And so once that response comes back, the ticket is either closed as it was actionable and action was taken, or closed as not actionable. So that way, JIRA reporting could be run on this project at the end of the month to understand the nature of the tickets that came in, how they were dealt with, and how they were closed out, and furthermore, use the results of that report to further train the AI detection models. So, fairly non-standard usage of JIRA here. And in fact, in this particular example, none of the JIRA UI is utilized by a human at all. This is entirely automated with a little bit of email communication going back and forth. That's it. When JIRA is used, it's to run a report at the end of the month. So let's look at another example. So this one's a little more fun. It is it's a product that we've built out called Fleet Management, and this is our UFO demo of it. Typically, this is actually utilized within the automotive industry, in particular for their internal operations. Turns out automakers, they have a problem of having too many cars. And so as they're doing research and development, they actually need to have systems that allow them to know where those cars are, who's checking them out for the purposes of research and development, how they're being checked out, and all the complications of approval that go with that. And so we've actually implemented this system at multiple automobile manufacturers, actually over here in Europe. And the system that we ended up building out of this became a generic solution, and we're seeing the UFO version of it. And so this is basically a reskinned version of ITSM. The users of this system, again, they're in the category of folks that they don't know what JIRA is, and they're not going to take the time to understand and use JIRA because their problem from their perspective is not JIRA shaped. So even though Atlassian, ITSM, and JIRA at least can all be bundled together to solve the problem, they're not actually interested in the products for what the products do. They're wondering how these products can be used to solve their very specific problem. So we took ITSM and we reskinned it. And so here we have what normally would have been like your grid of assets. Here we have it in, or rather, table of assets. Here it is in a grid with images and actionable callouts for each of the vehicles on the list. Of course, you can see more details. So rather than the default asset screen that allows you to go in and modify the content of an asset, we reskinned that as well. Behind it, you can also see a different table-based view of those vehicles as well. But the power of this is that it allows us to apply whatever kind of custom form manipulation, form verification that we want to the data input. So rather than having the restrictions that are available within ITSM, here we have a full flexibility of development in our hands to really fine-tune how the user interacts with the creation and the editing of a vehicle. But behind the scenes, it is still ITSM. So in this case, as the system is used, if they need to see more details, if they need to understand how the vehicles are operating, how they're going through a workflow, we don't have to build custom software for every portion of this experience. So instead what we did was we actually partnered with one of their JIRA admins. These are huge automobile industries that have JIRA in use within their organization already. And so this became an easy sell to say, let's build it on top of that, and if you give me a JIRA admin, I will train them on how to manage your software for you. And so that's what we did. We found a JIRA admin on site, and we trained them in the use of the underlying tools to be not just an admin of the Atlassian products, but to be an admin for their software as well. Beyond just the screens that we saw before, it's also possible to make reservations. And so this begins to tie together the ITSM side of the world with the JIRA side of the world. And so when you go to create a reservation, you can actually see the calendar for how that asset had various tickets created for it over time, each ticket representing a reservation. We pulled that together and presented it as a calendar. And of course, you can make new reservations, customizing that as well. So the user who's requesting a reservation, they're none the wiser that behind the scenes is an Atlassian product. Nevertheless, the result is a ticket that's created. All right, let's take a look at another example. Here we've got Yet another architecture that we put together. This time it was for a certification process where we had, so in the US, you've got medical professionals, and I'm sure it's similar here as well, but medical professionals will opt in to be members of various kinds of boards and organizations as part of their trade. And then in particular, we were looking at a particular surgical board where they wanted to create a system that would allow medical professionals to come in and undergo this pretty intense process of vetting. Had multiple steps. Some of those steps had many sub-steps to them, and they needed to provide that as a service to both the users who were trying to become certified, and that's what this diagram is indicating here. This is the person trying to become certified, the doctor trying to become certified, and a list of tasks that they have to complete. And the challenge is that some of these tasks go off to different groups of individuals to be signed off on. So once they've done their part of the work, then it becomes a part of someone within the board to then verify those requirements before they can move on to the next step. And then, of course, there's the administrator of the system who's kind of overseeing this entire process. Now, in the previous two examples, I mentioned that, depending on who the user is and what part of the process they're in, that they may or may not know or care about Jira. In this one, they definitely did not want the end user to know that they're using Atlassian products. Not because they had anything against them, but just because it was completely inappropriate for the use case to expect surgeons who are on a board who are on as a part of a volunteer basis with the organization trying to verify the credentials that were being submitted to them, like trying to train them up on the deep usage and understanding of Atlassian products was just out of the question. Furthermore, the folks submitting the answer or the material to the board, you didn't even really have that level of relationship to even expect them to begin to understand it. Nevertheless, we were able to put this together as an architectural solution using both ITSM and ITSM for the outside-facing portal, and then, of course, Jira to support the workflows that the user had to go through. All right, so at this point, you're probably thinking that I'm out of my mind, that this is overly complicated. Why in the world would anyone choose to do things this way? And beyond that, yeah, that's great, but all these things could have been done without Atlassian. Why would you add that to the mix? Well, we didn't do it naively. We've been doing it successfully without Atlassian in the mix for over 2 decades prior to that. So why? Well, there was actual real value add to be found here. Largely, this value add was in the form of choices that we deferred or completely skipped. So the first was when it comes down to the choice of database. Whenever you're architecting out software, one of the first things you do is, okay, where's the data going to live? And more often than not, especially when you're doing consultative development like we were, the first thing we have to then do is we now need to go on an archaeological dig of our client and find out, okay, what database do you use? Microsoft, great. I just talked to this team, they're using Postgres. Well, that team over there is using Azure in the cloud. They're using Firebase. So what database are you really using? And then after months of discussion, you finally agree that you're going to use Microsoft. Now you finally reach out to the IT or the infrastructure team at the client and begin the process of setting up that database. Another 3 months later, you finally have access to it. That's kind of an over-exaggerated example of the process you go through, but it's not far from the truth. We would have been waiting a long time just to have an on-prem database set up. Here, we're not making that decision. We're saying, you know what? You've got the Atlassian product suite already set up on-prem. We just need access to a couple instances of the products. So once that's set up, there we go. We got a database right available to us right away. Hosting, similar story. We have gone through that same process of trying to figure out how to get the actual web assets themselves hosted. With Forge, we're able to just pop it up onto that same Atlassian instance. Identity management. So if anyone's done completely custom software development, you know how much of a pain that is. And you know that that's actually a huge source of risk within the delivery of an MVP. Well, by placing it within the confines of the Atlassian instance, we know right away, even in the most simple case, that a user is going to have to at least be a part of the Atlassian instance, and someone will have had to vet them for that before accessing the application, and then we can go on to further restrict it from there. Workflow engine. All of these examples that we described involve this complex state management solution where the processes go through all these different states under all these different conditions. And rather than building and maintaining that ourselves, here it was, off the shelf, ready to go. And when we add all these up, this creates a much higher rate of success, especially when we're talking about MVP and proof of concept delivery for ideas that are just trying to get into the mind share of the organization. This comes by way of course, immediately being cheaper. We were able to reduce the number of developers required and the amount of time they would need to spend because we're just not building as much. So it led to faster delivery, fewer decisions to make, fewer requirements to come to agreement on, and there's less to build. And then less overhead. Not only is there less to build within the code itself, but many parts of the system, we can take a trained Atlassian admin and make them experts in this new software platform that's being built on top of it, because it's just another flavor of project management for them. So this led over the course of the last few years to about 50% reduction. This is rounded, it's not super scientific. This is just our observation from sending out contracts and getting the results back. We've got about a 50% reduction in the cost and the timeline that we ended up quoting to our clients by saying, you can either take the full stack custom solution version of our contract, or if you'll let us build it on the Atlassian platform, here's one that's going to happen twice as fast and at half the cost. And that's a pretty compelling win every day, especially if you know anything about the cost of 100% full stack custom development costs. That gets you into the 6 and 7 figures really, really quick. And so the cost of picking up licensing for a few more folks within the Atlassian platform, that's an easy win. So this cost reduction and timeline reduction, this shows up in the form of it being just truly agile development and deployment. We're not waiting to figure out what's the best exact database, how does it scale, how does it need to scale. We're saying let's ship. Let's take the easiest, shortest, fastest route to shipping, pick the things off the shelf that Atlassian provides us, and let's get it out the door. Reduce tech debt, similar to what we mentioned before. Not only is there less to build, it also means that there's just less to fix. There's less that we have to figure out how to get right. And then finally, there's just the quality that we're bringing to the table with our solutions. That's specifically invested in your business implementation, not on figuring out how to get 2 servers in different parts of your organization to talk to one another. Bottom line, building on top of Atlassian, this allows us to have smaller teams ship applications faster with less cost, complexity, and code. So for those of you with a keen eye and a pretty strong architectural sense, you have looked at some of these things that we've described and been like, you can't do that on Forge. And you're right, not all of these examples today are 100% built on Forge. There's a blend within those examples that I talked about, but Forge is where we're looking ahead to. That's where we're choosing to invest, and that's where we're looking to build on top of. And another great question is it safe to twist the arm of the Atlassian tools like that and then build the new systems that an organization is going to run on top of that? Like, is that a smart choice? Is that going to introduce risk down the road? Now, towards that end, I don't believe so. Everything that we've seen coming out of the Atlassian team and the Forge teams, from talking to them, from working alongside them, kind of sharing what we've been working on, we only see a further nod towards support of this category of usage within the platform. Just within the last 2 days we've been here, we've heard from them about their custom entities. And they've alluded to the idea of, you can just use this as a database for your applications. So they're actually leaning into this idea, if not outright promoting it as another way to use the platform. We've seen things about multi-user app ownership, the idea that you can actually have a larger team working on and sharing that top-level responsibility for the application. This really unlocks the door for more robust enterprise-scale development teams to do some larger development. Export metrics, the ability to piggyback on top of the metrics that Forge provides for the custom apps, also can be used for your apps as well. and on and on. We've seen and heard many of these stories over the last couple days. So let's go back to the title idea here of this being called the at stack. I've not shown you any here's your NPM link to go download the thing or anything like that, because where it is today it's currently an idea. This is me introducing this idea to the world. It's not uniquely mine. It's not an isolated idea, but I did want to formally say, let's go ahead and start thinking about this as a formal construct and see what we can do to actually come together and start building actual community and formal support around this idea. Tomorrow, this could be official API support. If enough of us were able to band together, share what we've worked on, share the things that we've built, and come to the Forge team and say, hey, here's what we're building, here's what our customers are needing, and here's how the APIs could be improved in order to make this easier at the end of the day, they're going to back that. If we can come to them with these use cases, they'll be on board with making changes. And so this is an opportunity to come together, figure out how to improve the tooling and actually affect the roadmap of the Forge team itself. So towards that end, this is a link to my LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn, share what you're working on, and let's start to build that community. Let's see who we can invite in. Let's see who we can bring in, be a part of the growth of this particular use case, and see what we can do. So a lot of work's gone into this conference, and so I'll just do a quick plug here for them. They'd like folks to provide feedback and rate the sessions and comment. So if you'd like to do that, there's the QR code for that. Otherwise, thank you, and any questions?